Hey guys, how's it going? Today we're starting the process of digging and storing our dahlias. So I'm standing in front of our pretty bad looking dahlia patch. The first killing frost, so it was a light frost that just took the tops and made them look kind of black and crummy like that. It came through a couple of weeks ago, but then the temperatures warmed back up again, which allowed me to leave them in the ground longer and get other garden chores done. But last night it was 26, and we're gonna have some consistently colder nights, so that frost line is going to start creeping down into the soil, and I don't want it to reach the tubers, so we need to get this done. We grew 6 rows that are 60 feet long, and honestly, it's one of the easiest flower crops we have out here in the cut flower garden once you have your infrastructure in place. Like, that is a bit of a process to figure out how you want to stake them. We use the T-posts here, and then this, I think it's like nylon cord that we run at 2 and 3 foot lengths, and then we just use like little ties if the dahlias need a little bit of extra support. So as they grow, we can lash them off onto these. And then we use drip tape, a piece of drip tape that's got emitter holes every 6 inches, and they get water every day throughout the course of the summer. I'm not growing these necessarily for massive production. Like, I like to have as many flowers as possible, but I'm not selling them. I'm not out to sell the blooms. So like, if I don't get to the pinching process, which you know, a lot of people recommend doing, I don't worry about it. I didn't pinch these this year. I didn't fertilize them along the way, only at planting. So when we planted them, we dug the holes, we put in land and seed compost and biotone starter fertilizer, and that is it. That is all they got all season, other than just consistent water and full sun. That's it. These plants just thrived and did great. We did this whole process last year and I showed it to you. I'm gonna be doing it exactly the same way because we had such phenomenal success at the whole storage process. I was very happy with it, just because it was the first time I had ever stored anything in our root cellar. I was trying to figure out that system with the humidity and all of that. And then it was the first time I had ever stored dahlias on this scale. I didn't have quite as many last year as I do this year, but it was still a lot. I think I had like 275 dahlia plants in the ground last year. I don't know that I have that many more this year, but I know just a few more. So as I was thinking about it this fall, I thought, okay, I want to sit down and write down the steps that I took last year because I want to make sure I'm doing it the same way. It ended up being a list of 9 steps, which I have right here. I'll try to remember to copy this in the description of this video below if you're the type that likes to have like a written list. I like both a written list and I like to see it visually. So I'm hoping that this video kind of serves as both. So basically what we're going to be doing is starting at number 1 and we'll work our way down to number 9. And to make it easier, just because we're going to be doing it the same for all of these, I'll just show you with like the first 4 plants I think are the same variety. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Step number 1 is very easy. You want to dig them after a killing frost, which is what we have here. Step number 2 is to take your clippers and you want to cut all the leaves and stalks down to about 4 to 6 inches above the ground. We're not going to keep these stalks through the storage process, but it makes them a lot easier to handle, and it gives you kind of a handle. So when you're digging them up, you can have something to grab onto. At this point, it is an option, depending on your weather, to leave the tubers in the ground for 1 or 2 weeks longer. So if your temperatures are going to remain right at that light frost level, so just right around freezing, you can leave them under the ground. It will help the tubers develop better eyes, like more visible eyes. So if you do plan to divide your clumps of tubers in the fall rather than in the spring, it can help you in that process because you'll be able to see them easier. But if your temperatures are going to be lower than that, then you need to get them lifted right away. Like, temperatures in the 20s is not a good idea. I know we're going to get 26 tonight again, so we need to get them lifted. But it is an option. If your weather is conducive for it, you can do that. Step number 3 is to grab your digging fork. Digging forks are a little bit easier to use in this process over shovels because you're less likely to pierce tubers with a digging fork. And you want to start to gently lift the clump out of the ground, but you want to make sure that your digging fork's not right up at the base of your plant. You want to move it away a little bit because the tubers sometimes are huge and they can reach out quite far. Also, you do want to be incredibly careful during this process. Like, go slow. Try not to pull on those stalks very hard because those tubers are so fragile. They snap really easily. And I've snapped my fair share of tubers just like in a hurry trying to get them out of the ground. So just be mindful of that. I'm just gently removing excess soil out here. Ideally, we've had quite a bit of rain, so you can see how much soil's sticking to these tubers. Ideally, you would let them dry out just a little bit so that you don't have like quite as much soil sticking to them. There's clump number 1. So there's our first 4 clumps. These are all the same variety. They're called Mambo, and I started with probably a group of 2 tubers, and they have multiplied pretty well. Like this one has a lot in it. This one is the littlest one, but still pretty good. Kind of want to go dig one of the ones that I stored to see how those grew. Hold on, before you move on to the next step. Different varieties dug here, and I just wanted to do that to show you how different the tubers can look from one variety to the next. Like right here, this is the Mambo, and you can see that these tubers are much more rounded and small. And then you look at the snowbound, like these clumps are massive. They're huge, the tubers are huge on them. Just nuts. You can see the original one. Look at this. It's where I wrote on it. Look at that. That's the original tuber I planted, and that's what it turned into. It's crazy. And then this one is the dinner plate pastel mix right here. Pretty wild looking. Isn't it amazing that such beautiful flowers come from something that looks like that? They look like potatoes. And the next step is to label them. I do it right here, right out in the garden, right after I have them dug up, because I have so many varieties to deal with. It may not be something that you're concerned with. If you're just growing a handful of varieties and it doesn't matter if you've got them all planted together in the same spot, then you can skip this step. It's not a big deal. And I label in a couple of different ways. So at this point, I'll either, if I've got like 10 clumps of the snowbound, I'll just use the label that I had in the ground, and I'll just put that at the top of the crate, because these will take up at least 1 crate, if not 2. So it's possible I might have to make a second tag. But that way I don't have to individually label each clump. But for the ones like Mambo, where I've just got 4 smaller clumps, those will be in a crate with other things. So I want to make sure that they're all labeled. To do that, I'll either use like a pull-through tag, or I'll use wire with one of these like waterproof tags right here. And I've got a marker in my pocket. Right here, the garden marker. These last for quite a long time. Some people will wait to label until after they're done rinsing and drying, and then they'll use a permanent marker right on the tuber. I actually don't do that until the spring when I divide them. That way I only have to do 1 label today on a clump, and then after I get done cutting them up, I will write on each individual tuber that I have with a permanent marker. I just feel like it's really hard to write with permanent marker on the tubers because they're so wrinkly, and I have a hard time reading it anyway. And if they have to go through months of winter storage, it's possible that it might even be harder to read. So I like the tag method at this point. So I'll just take one of my clumps and one of my tags, slide it around the stem or a small tuber, and voila. The next step involves a hose. So I'm going to get all of these labeled and prepared, and then we'll run up and I'll show you step number 5. Okay, so we've got all the tubers that we just dug lined up, ready for the next step, which is to clean them, especially when the clumps come up with so much excess soil wrapped around all the tubers and a lot of excess moisture, because that can cause a lot of problems in storage. So I take a hose with a jet stream, I clean off all that extra soil so I can see what I'm dealing with. I can see if there are any damaged tubers that need to be removed. This is the point where I take off all that excess stem length. I mean, you can leave it on there, but it's completely unnecessary and it takes up a lot of storage room. So it's just kind of a clean cleaning process. Now, if you have your dahlias planted in a soil mixture, like in a raised bed with really lofty, loose soil where it's really easy to dig them out, and you've cut the water so there's not a lot of excess moisture, you might be able to skip the rinsing step. And some people will like wait and do that in the spring if there's not a lot of excess moisture but still dirt on them. Like this one right here, this one broke off one of the bigger clumps, but it's still got the eye and the neck and the tuber, so this one will still grow a great plant. There's not soil around it, I mean just a tiny little bit, and that's okay. That can actually help them store longer. It's just when you've got a lot of moist soil that's kind of caked around all the tubers. So this one I'm going to leave alone. I already cleaned up a couple of these clumps just to show you what we're dealing with, because this is what they look like before. I mean, you just saw them come out of the ground. So much soil, and it's really hard to get all of it from like the cracks and in between the tubers without breaking the tubers. Water is so much easier, and that way you can see, like, look at that, you can see exactly what we're dealing with. So at this point I go in, I cut the stems off. I'm going to leave a little bit of stem on that one just because I've got my tag there. And then I inspect everything. I mean, you can cut all of these little roots off if you want, just to clean them up. I don't really worry about that too much. What I'm really looking for is just breakage or anything that got pierced. And this clump actually looks really good, Russell. But this clump right here, so I cleaned this one as well. Everything looks pretty good except for this one right here. So see, that one got pierced right there. It also got cut off on the end, like popped off. So you can go in and you want to cut those kinds of things off, because these things rot a lot easier and you don't want to have that going on inside your storage crates. Okay, Russell, you're not going to like the next part with all the water. At this point too, sometimes I will remove the tag and put them on a tuber instead of the stem, because they sometimes will stay a lot better. And then we can clip stems off. And it's not imperative to get 100% of the soil out of there. A little bit's fine because it will still dry. It's just getting the big clumps off. And these are ready to go right here. And I decided to use these tabletops that we were using in the high tunnel to store plants because they can drip dry perfectly out here. I think that's going to work great. A cart also works really well. I've got the Mambos sitting here and they can drip dry, or you can just do it straight on the ground. Whatever works. So let's just get these cleaned up and we'll move on to the next step. That step is all done. They're cleaned. Anything damaged was removed. This is my refuse pile here. Stems were removed as well. So anything, you know, that was broken in half or whatever, if the neck was broken on it, those got removed. And then of course, all these big stems, that just takes up room in storage. Plus that's a bunch of extra moisture you don't want to introduce in. And it just amazes me that you can put a couple tubers in the ground in a hole and you can yield so much in just one growing season. I mean, I don't know how many tubers are on that one clump, but a lot. And then it's just a really quick review about the anatomy of a dahlia tuber. You only need one tuber to create a plant. So this right here is the body of the tuber, and they'll all be shaped different. Like here's a body that's a lot thicker and more squat. This one's a lot longer. There are some that are real skinny and long, but you have your basic body, and then you've got your neck right here, which is where it gets more slender. And then you've got this point right here. See where it kind of gets thicker right there and bulges? Same with like this one here. There's the body, the neck, and then right in here, that's your eye. That's the growth point. So when we come in here in the spring, we will be cutting these apart, making sure that we have all three of those pieces for every tuber. And sometimes that means you will leave a few tubers connected together because there's not a really good way to cut them apart, which is totally fine as well. So you can really dissect them down to single tubers. You can leave them in little clumps. It's just when they get to be this big, like some of these clumps are really, really hard to plant all in the same hole. You'd have to break out the biggest auger you've got, or dig a big hole with a shovel, however you like to plant them. So the next step is packing these up, and there's a lot of different methods. The basics is that you just want to make sure you're putting them in a container that's breathable. So a cardboard box is fine, a milk crate. I use the bulb crates that are my bulbs are sent in because they have open sides. And then I use, to keep all of my storage medium, so I use vermiculite as my storage medium. I use a double layer of burlap. In fact, I've got one kind of set up to show you. I'm actually not going to pack them today because I still need to let them dry. But this here's the crate. You can see it's got open sides, so airflow is nice. It doesn't keep moisture in. I use 2 burlap sacks like that, and then I put a fine layer of vermiculite on the bottom that has been lightly moistened. And that's something that you may or may not have to do. I have to add in a little bit of moisture, otherwise my tubers will dry up. Even in storage in our root cellar where the humidity is kept at a certain level, I do need to introduce a tiny bit of moisture in. In fact, I noticed that there were some varieties like Cafe au lait. That one wanted to dry out more than all the rest of my tubers. I don't know why. In fact, when I get new tubers of Cafe au lait, those are always packed in peat moss, while I'll get other bags of tubers that are just the tuber and nothing around it. So it's kind of interesting. You learn about different varieties through the whole process. But I use about 1 cup of water per 5-gallon bucket full of vermiculite. It's just barely enough to, you can almost not tell that it's moist, but it introduces just enough to where I didn't have to add any moisture in during my storage process last year, and most of them did really, really well. I didn't have anything rot. If anything, I had a few tubers dry out. So I add my layer of vermiculite on the bottom, and then I take a clump like this, and I lay it down in the crate like that, and this one isn't fully dry, so I'm going to be taking this back out. This is just for demonstration purposes, but then I put vermiculite around the whole entire clump, and I make sure it's all filled, and then I can pack several more clumps of tubers in here. You just want to make sure that they're not touching each other, that you've given them plenty of space. So depending on the size of clump, you might be able to fit like 5 clumps, or you might be able to fit 10 if they're really small. And in terms of other storage mediums, some people will use wood chips and swear by it. Some people use peat moss, some use newspapers, and I think it kind of just is a little bit of a trial and error to see what works for you. And because this worked so well to use vermiculite last year, I actually saved all of it from last year, so I don't even have to rebuy it. I'm just going to do that same thing again because it was so great. So after I have my crate filled with the tubers and vermiculite, and all the tubers are covered, so all I'm seeing at the top is vermiculite, I flip the burlap sack that's kind of hanging over the edge, I flip it over as kind of a lid. So it doesn't have like a hard lid on top at all. These crates stack really nicely, one on top of the other. So at that point, the packing is done. So the next step is to find a spot that will stay consistently between 40 and 55. So somewhere, that's degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere where it's not too warm that they'll dry out and not too cold that they'll freeze. And so we had a root cellar put in our barn last year. That's where we stored them, and they did great. So I think that has a lot to do with it, finding a spot that kind of maintains that temperature for you. It might be an unfinished garage or something like that, or a cold frame even. Sometimes cold frames, depending on your area, will stay warm enough to store. Sometimes it's a basement or under your house. I've heard of people putting them in their crawl space under their house. So you just kind of have to figure out what works best for you. And then the very last step is to make sure to check on them every crate once a month throughout the winter months. Now, I was not diligent about that last year because I was having a baby in January. So that kind of like Dahlia storage kind of went out the window just a little bit, and I was lucky that everything did as well as it did. But it's a good idea to check your crates, because then you can mist them with a little bit of extra water if they seem like really extra dry, or you can remove anything that might seem like it's rotting, because you don't want to leave those kinds of things in. It can make more problems. And that is my dahlia digging and storage process. It's worked really well for me so far, and it's just kind of an interesting thing to try, because last year it was complete trial. I didn't know exactly, I did as much reading and research as I could and kind of tried to pick what I had on hand. Like I had those bulb crates on hand. I knew that those would work in burlap sacks in terms of ventilation, and I know people find really creative ways of doing things. Some people will store them in paper bags even. So it might be just a little bit of a trial and error because of how different everybody's area is with humidity levels and temperatures and all that. But this method has worked great for us so far. And then sometime either late March or April, I'll come in, take them all out of their crates and divide them like I did this last year. I just set up a table, and you want to start yourself a movie I watched movies on my phone the whole time because it's kind of a tedious process, I'm not gonna lie. I'm so much more confident in it this year though. I mean, the more you do it, the more confidence you have. I know when I was just kind of staring at my first crate of tubers last year to divide them, I thought, well, like some of the eyes are really obvious, but some of them aren't. So once you get into it though, you kind of get your rhythm and you start building confidence, and then everything worked out so well and grew so well this year that I feel like I'm getting my process nailed down. Sometimes it takes a little while. So anyway, that is it for this project, kind of. I mean, I wanted to show you how I dig and store dahlias. I mean, we have a lot more work yet to do out in the cut flower garden with the dahlias. We have a lot more to dig, but the process I feel like we've gotten nailed down, and that just feels so good. And it can be really overwhelming when you're very first starting out with something like this that seems so fussy, and you see so many different ways of doing things, and you're like, well, which one do I choose? And I kind of was there, like at the beginning of this process when I was reading of all the different storage mediums. I thought, well, I don't know which one I should go with, so I just kind of picked one and jumped in, and I'm thankful that it worked like it did. And I just wanted to be able to, like, as I do these things, share what's working and what's not working. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.